Well, it is a delight to be here. I'm really excited. I've actually, unless I came as a child, because my parents did, we lived in Louisiana for a while when I was young. I don't think that I've been to Arkansas or to Little Rock for sure. So it's really a great treat to be here. I wasn't so sure last evening when we arrived at around midnight in Fort Smith. We were flying through Atlanta yesterday and there were bad storms, and so missed all the connections, and the suggestion was that this morning we fly out of Atlanta to Pittsburgh and then to Detroit and then to Little Rock. So I might have gotten here in time for dinner, but I would have missed all of you today. But I was a little bit taken when we landed at Fort Smith and the sign said, "Where the Old West meets the New South." And I thought, uh-oh, we've gone too far. Better head back. But we drove several hours, made it to the hotel late last night, and I was comforted when I saw that the Capitol Hotel, which is absolutely beautiful, is called the front porch of Little Rock. So I felt like I was back at home. I do want to thank Matthew Bees for being here with me and having made the connection with Alan, and also for driving last night. I thought I'd also explain, I don't think you in the back can see, but I have a very lovely bruise on my face here, and you've heard that my husband is a Presbyterian minister, so hopefully he was not responsible for that. But I was actually in Mississippi this last weekend and happened to be there right around where the Mississippi State game was going on, so that was very exciting. But I was there quail hunting and pheasant hunting, and on Sunday morning, we were shooting clays out of this big tower, about as tall as that, around a hill, and all these clays were just flying. And I finally got my groove on and was breaking more than I was missing, and one came flying over, and I wasn't quite ready. I wasn't fully, in position, and I took a really bad shot. I should have never done it, but that's what that is. It's perils of the business sometimes, so. But it was a lot of fun. Often when I talk to people, I do talk about divine intervention and the role that it played in Garden and Gun, because truly if my husband had not become a Presbyterian minister and things had kind of fallen into place in my life as the way they had, I don't think that there would be a Garden and Gun. So 10 years ago, when Cress and I moved to Charleston, South Carolina, when he took a call with the church, the men of the church presented him an oyster knife. And I happened to bring my oyster knife with me. I braved TSA. It was in my checked bag, but hope that they wouldn't discover it and take it out of there. But my husband is originally from Texas. We had lived in New York for a long time, and these men thought, now this dude, he doesn't know anything about oysters and anything about an oyster knife, and so they gave him a lovely oyster knife. And I thought what I would do was start by just reading one of the little essays out of the book quickly, and then we'll talk about some other things. But this is called, and this is from our book, The Southerner's Handbook, which I see a few of you have bought, more than a few, thank you very much, The Guide to Living the Good Life. This is called Mind Over Mollusk, or How to Shuck an Oyster Without Cutting Off Your Finger. So, that an average oyster holds itself shut with little more than 20 pounds of pressure ranks pretty high on the list of useless facts, unless you're the poor shucker on the other end of the oyster knife. But rest easy, there are a few tricks to help you get to the briny goodness inside with a minimum of tussle. As owner and barmaster at Eddie Teach's Raw Bar on Florida's St. George Island, James Frost shucks around 50 dozen oysters a day, and has learned the hard way that it's a matter of technique. How long did it take him to perfect his skills? About 2 years, maybe 17 stitches, more than 100 knives, and more oysters than I can count, he says. The first thing to know, Frost advises, is that if you're exerting a lot of force, you're doing something wrong. The secret to shucking a raw oyster isn't about brute force, it's about leverage and having the right tools, namely a good oyster knife and a glove. The glove goes on the hand that holds the oyster, your non-dominant hand, primarily to protect against the shell's sharp edges. At the oyster hinges, the pointy end, there is usually a small opening where the two halves of the shell have grown slightly apart from each other. That's if you're lucky. This is the spot to wedge in the tip of your knife, and from here, it's all in the wrist. A lot of times people will overdo it, Frost says. They'll wiggle up and down and try to force it. Just twist your wrist. That will provide enough leverage for the rear of the upper shell to come loose. All that's left is cutting the muscle that connects the meat to the shell, and hardest of all, deciding whether you want it with lemon juice, hot sauce, or nothing but the sublime liquor nature has provided. So that's how to shuck an oyster, something that I've gotten pretty good at over the years. Clyde Edgerton, who is one of the preeminent Southern writers and happens to be the book editor for Garden and Gun. And I'm very proud that we do have a regular column in the magazine. We have from the beginning, and so many magazines have decided to not do book columns in the magazine. But Clyde wrote the little quote in the beginning of the Southerner's Handbook, and I'm going to read that to you. "Because I was born in the South, I'm a Southerner. If I had been born in the North, the West, or the Central Plains, I would be just a human being." So I could sit down now and leave it at that. But we are here to talk about Garden and Gun and the South. And what is the South? I don't know that I really know what the South is. But when we launched the magazine, we, primarily for financial reasons, because we didn't have a lot of money when we were starting up, we distributed the magazine primarily in the Southeast. And then along came Texas. Now, my husband is a Texan, so, I thought Texas is a whole separate country, and why would they want to be considered part of the South? But they started clamoring that they wanted to be written up in the magazine. They wanted to be able to find the magazine in their bookstores and their grocery stores. So we added Texas, and Texas is now one of our largest states of circulation. And then Maryland started chiming in, and we added Maryland into the mix. And in the last year or so, Oklahoma has been putting on the pressure really, really hard. I finally got so many letters from, I can't remember if it was the governor or the lieutenant governor, but anyway, we now occasionally cover Oklahoma. But the reality is that Garden and Gun, and I think this lure of the South, is not something that is just limited to a particular geographical place. And I don't think it's just Southerners who are in love with what is going on in the South. I think that many people have lived in the South or visited the South, or their family was originally from the South and they have the connection with the South. And in the case of the magazine, which we'll talk about a little bit more later, I think it's the lifestyle that we write about that is really intriguing to people. And in some cases, some people may not even really care that much about that lifestyle, but they love the writing in the magazine because we really do have incredible writing. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here, so I'm going to step back a minute and talk about me. I hope you won't mind just for a few minutes because I think it's part of the story. But I grew up in Columbia, South Carolina, and then I went to the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. I was planning to go to law school, but I wanted to go live for a year in New York because I had been an out-of-state student at UNC, and a lot of my friends were from New York and New Jersey, and I spent quite a bit of time visiting with them over the years. So my father was a professor of economics, and I knew the way to his pocketbook was through school. And so I just wanted to go live in New York for a year and have him pay for it. So I found this school called the Toby Coburn School for Fashion Careers and went to New York for a year thinking I was just going to have a free ride, a lark. And it turned out to be one of the most difficult things that I ever did. But what happened was that I had an internship at GQ magazine. And when I graduated from the school, I was offered a job at GQ magazine. So New York had its hold on me, and law school fell by the way, and I stayed in New York. And I had a fabulous time at GQ. I went on, as Alan said, to be the publisher of the New Yorker magazine, which was my father's proudest day, I think, when that was announced. And then on to Mirabella and Fortune. And I loved my career, really, I missed the South. I would come home as often as I could, but really never thought that in the foreseeable future I would be returning back home. But this crazy husband of mine he was a television producer, decided to become a Presbyterian minister. And so off we went to Princeton for 4 years while he was in seminary, and then he took a call with a church in Charleston, South Carolina. And I do have to say, there are times I'm like, I'm the preacher's wife, really? I mean, how did this happen? This is not what I signed on for. But it got me, to a new place in my life. We kind of chucked it all and moved to Charleston. In the meantime, had these two beautiful daughters. And there I found myself in Charleston. So one summer, I was up at Pawleys Island walking on the beach with a friend of mine right after we moved there, a friend of mine who lives in D.C. now, and she said, Rebecca, I really think you ought to start a New Yorker of the South. And I said, no, I don't think so. I don't think anybody would really be interested in it. I've got two little babies. No way, not happening, And then I started thinking about it. And I did come to realize that there really was a void in the marketplace, I think, for a magazine that was for really smart, sophisticated Southerners who probably read lots of other very, very good magazines, but that those magazines don't really speak to them in their language and really about their experiences. And so this was kind of percolating in my head, and lo and behold, I met a man named Pierre Manigault, who is now my current partner. His family owns the newspaper in Charleston, South Carolina. And they were doing a little magazine in the paper called Low Country Living, and he begged and pleaded would I come and help them with that. So I agreed to consult for 5 hours a week and try to help with this magazine in the newspaper. And about 2 weeks into it, I realized that magazines and newspapers are very separate disciplines. They're really very different, and that unless the newspaper company was willing to make a proper investment in people to do this magazine, that it probably wasn't going to be successful. So I decided to take that idea that had been kind of percolating in my head and write a business plan and present it to this company, the Evening Post Publishing Company. And took about a year to convince them, because magazines are much more expensive to produce than newspapers are. But we got funded in fall of 2006, and by spring of 2007, we had our first issue of the magazine out in the marketplace. We did 4 issues of the magazine that year, and then in 2008, we did 6 issues. We were going to do 6 issues, but things were going so well, we added a 7th issue all about Southern food. And then lo and behold, I don't have to tell you what happened. At the end of 2008, the brakes came on, everything came to a screeching halt. And the Evening Post decided that they couldn't continue to fund the magazine. So I felt like there were so many things aligned, though, and that we really had this amazing connection with our readers, and I wasn't going to let this go. So I went to Pierre, who was the chairman of the board of the Evening Post, and said, you and I have to buy Garden and Gun and keep this going. And that's what we did. I don't know how we did it. I did a lot of begging and groveling and promising people I would pay them someday. But we made it through. And I think it really always kind of sitting on my shoulder were those readers up there that I think we might have had a revolution on our hands if we had closed the magazine. But you remember, this is when Gourmet was closing. I mean, all these incredible brands in the magazine business were just kind of falling by the wayside. But my favorite was a letter that I got from a gentleman that said, "Dear heroes and heroines, if you ever shut this magazine down, I will come and shoot you." Nothing like fear to motivate you. So we ended up skipping an issue that year. We only did 5 issues in 2009, and then since then have been publishing 6 issues ever since and have made it through to the other side. We've won a National Magazine Award for General Excellence, which is like Best Picture in our world. We have a very strong circulation story when many magazines are fighting to hold on to their circulation base. We sell like hotcakes on the newsstand. We have this incredible audience that is kind of an advertiser's dream, and I brought this because in our business, you kind of weigh it and feel how it is. It's a healthy magazine. It's doing very, very well. And we have, in fact, even been called the New Yorker of the South in a couple of articles that have been written, so I guess my friend was right. Our readers are more like fans, sometimes fanatics, but they really feel this amazing relationship with the magazine. And early on, a guy wrote a letter that said, there's the Bible and there's Garden and Gun. Bible's kind of heavy sometimes, Garden and Gun's lighter. Both have their place in the human experience. And as the preacher's wife, I thought that was pretty high praise. So why have we, I think, succeeded and kind of bucked the trends? First of all, I think because from the get-go, we took risks with this magazine. The name, everybody always wants to know about the name. Garden and what? I mean, if I've had to answer that question once, I've answered it 1,000 times. Being up in New York at an ad agency, trying to convince somebody that this is the perfect place for them to advertise. Also, you get guns and gardens, and I always say if you put an S on either one of the words, you don't really get what we're about. But Garden and Gun was actually the name of a club in Charleston in the late 70s and early 80s. I think it was our Studio 54. I never was there, so I don't exactly know. But somebody suggested that name to me, and when I heard those words, I could just picture what this magazine could be. And so I could have done all kind of research and focus groups and been convinced not to name the magazine Garden and Gun. But I thought it was gutsy and that it would stand out, and I think thought it was really a perfect description of what we are, because the garden is the land. It's really about, and this magazine is really about the land and all the things that come out of the southern land, from the food to the music to the art and so on. And the gun is the sporting life, which is certainly an integral part of the magazine. I also loved that it was kind of male and female, and I had always wanted to do a magazine that both men and women would like equally, and that has turned out to be the case. We hear about couples who fight over the magazine when it comes in, and who's going to get it first, and then the smart ones who have 2 subscriptions to the magazines. I also think that we've been nimble. I mean, we're doing a magazine out of Charleston, South Carolina, that competes on the highest level with the companies that I used to work with, like Condé Nast and Time Inc. And we do it with less people. I think we have more fun doing it, and we have lives outside of just working too. But we're able to make quick decisions, and sometimes to just sit back and watch what the bigger boys are doing and learn from their mistakes. I think digital is a good example of that. Everybody talks digital, 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 and magazines are dying. Well, the reality is that we didn't really have that much demand for a digital issue, but we knew that the time would come that we should do it. But rather than jumping into the fray right from the beginning, we let the other people kind of work out the kinks and make the mistakes, and then came out with our digital edition last year, and it was nominated by the National Magazine Association as one of the top 5 digital editions last year. We lost to National Geographic, but I'll take that. I don't think that's too bad a company. My mission also from the beginning has always to do it best, do it the right way. And I think, those of you who know the magazine, or if you talk to people, if someone finds the magazine in a hotel or somewhere, and the first thing they talk about is the paper. They absolutely love the paper. They love the writing. The photography is over the top. I have an amazing staff that I've been able to pull together of people who have had primarily New York experience, but had Southern roots and were willing to leave those big jobs in New York and come to work for us. And I think that we treat our readers with real respect. And so they trust us. What we say in the magazine, if we tell them some place to go or what's the newest gadget or whatever it is, I think that they trust us. At the end of the day, we're really just a good old-fashioned magazine. I think that we're back to doing quality and giving people something that they want to read. I also believe in always acting bigger than you are. My mother or my grandmother probably would have said I was too big for my britches, but I, from the start with the magazine, wanted to play on a national level. And so we are a magazine that is a national magazine. It's sold all over the country. It happens to be about a region. And I think that's put us in a really good place. And otherwise, my vision has always been to be more than just a magazine company. And so what I spend a lot of time working on is thinking about things that grow out of this content of this magazine and what we're about, and other things that we can do around that. So what we've really grown into is a lifestyle brand, and we do amazing events such as the one that went on this weekend in Mississippi, but things from big events at Blackberry Farm and all kinds of things like that, from music to food and the sporting life. We have a pretty strong presence in retail online. We have something called G&G Mercantile, and we are beginning to explore. We're beyond exploring, but we are probably going to be actually opening up some physical retail garden and gun experiences in the next year or so. We do an amazing event called Jubilee we launched last year. It's the first week in December in Charleston, and if you can travel that time, I would encourage you to come. It's really the magazine coming to life at a lovely plantation. It's in town in Charleston called Charlestown Landing. It's where the explorers, the discoverers of Charleston originally came. And we do all kinds of things, from cooking pigs and having great music and having a retail experience, being able to, it's a great time to buy Christmas presents, and the tickets are selling fast and furious, but it's a great thing. So I would encourage you to look in the magazine and take a look at that, and sometime over the next few years try to plan and come to Charleston and visit us for that. And we've recently just started a land company called Garden and Gun Land, where we are developing a marketing and consulting business with landowners to help them either improve their properties if they want to, or to perhaps market their properties. So that's more to come on that. But this lifestyle that Garden and Gun has come to represent is rooted in an emotional connection to the land, and then it translates into this lifestyle. And it can be anything from, as I mentioned before, the food that comes out of that land, the culture, the music, the arts, the sporting life, the style, and travel. Travel is a big piece of what we do. And it's also about the high and the low. Julia Reed writes a column regular column in the magazine called The High and the Low, and which is very humorous. You have to read that. But we also, it's not just her column, it's that we will talk about, maybe a $250,000 shotgun on one page, and the next page we're talking about the barbecue joint down the dirt road. And that's really what this place is like and what that lifestyle is about. And it seems to be a lifestyle that more and more people want to be a part of. As I mentioned, the definition is not just geographical. In fact, at this point, almost 45% of our circulation is outside of the Southeast. So we've definitely made our mark. Books is one of the brand extensions that early on I thought was a natural for us. We've always done a column in the magazine called The Good Dog. And dogs, if you know, we do anything about dogs. I'm so excited. I wish I could have brought the cover of the next issue, but it's our sporting life issue, and we will always put a dog on the cover because it's our best-selling issue ever. And this one is so cute. He's just, and if we do, we have a good dog contest, and people, through social media, put up pictures of their dogs, and we offer a winner. And dogs, and barbecue. You can never do enough of it. But anyway, I thought that after we had enough of a collection of these good dog columns in the magazine, that perhaps we could do a book that would be a collection of those essays. And so talked to my editor-in-chief, Dave DiBenedetto, and said, let's go talk to some publishers and see if they'd be interested in doing this. Well, it turned out people were very interested, but in the end, HarperCollins won a deal with us, which is a 3-book deal. And they recommended that we hold off on Good Dog until our second book, and that our first book should be this Southerner's Handbook. And so that's what we did. And then the third book, just to let you know, is going to be a cookbook. So we are fast and furious in the world of book publishing as well. So the book, it's hard to describe it, because if you look at it, I love the cover. I think it's beautiful. The little drawings inside are lovely. But it's a collection of essays from some of our writers for the magazine, and essays written by certain people on the staff. Dave DiBenedetto, who is our editor-in-chief, is the actual editor of the magazine, of the book. He's also the editor of the magazine. But it's things like Roy Blunt telling how to tell a good story. John T. Edge, who was mentioned, on why Southern food matters so much. Allison Glock, Johnny Miles, Julia Reed, the ultimate party girl on Secrets of a Southern Hostess, Daniel Wallace. And then they even had asked my husband if he would write something on how to sleep during church without the preacher knowing you're sleeping. It didn't make the final cut. I know he said he didn't think he was qualified to write that, but we did ask a friend from Alabama to see if he would do it, and it didn't make the final cut. But I know that you will enjoy this book, and it also, I'm not just up here selling it, but truly it is a great gift for people. I think the interesting thing about Garden and Gun is that even though we have, we've done very, very well, and we are fairly large at this point, our circulation is over 350,000, there's still a lot of people who don't know this magazine, and that's a good thing. I like that. I like that there's opportunity. And, I think that turning them on to the magazine or giving them this book is a nice little treat. And I actually I only have one. This is hot off the press, but The Good Dog just came in this week, and that will be out, I think October 21st is our launch date for that. So they make a nice little package. But actually, the Southerner's Handbook sold beyond HarperCollins' dreams. And we came out, the week it came out, we were number 13 on the New York Times bestseller list, so that was a nice surprise. And so we've been holding off on The Good Dog a little bit to let the Southerner's Handbook kind of play its way through. I'm going to close in a minute, and so y'all can ask me some questions, but I'm going to go back to my oyster knife. So this is my beautiful oyster knife, and really, the reason I brought it is because this was made by a guy named Chris Williams. And Chris Williams was a banker. He hated his job. All he wanted to do was make knives. And 5 years ago, we launched our Made in the South Awards, which we do every year now. And Chris Williams was our first winner of the Made in the South Awards. And it changed his life. He was able to leave that job that he didn't like. He now gets to do what he really loves. And so last year at Jubilee, Chris was there showing people how he makes his knives, and he gave me this. And it really makes me proud that at the end of the day, I think that Garden and Gun is doing things to elevate Southern culture. I think that we have kind of brought a renewed feeling of pride for Southern people. It's hard to describe because it's really kind of simple. We are, with the South as our muse, we're able to just look out at the stories that are out there. They're endless. It's the people, the artisans, the chefs, the craftsmen, the sportsmen, the musicians. And it's just really simply about their experiences and why they love the South and telling their stories. And I think that's what has made that real connection with our readers. So with the book, with the magazine, with Made in the South, with Jubilee, I really believe that we have brought Southern culture to a new place and that it has become culturally relevant to not only our nation, but even globally. I'm surprised sometimes when I travel to hear the stories that people have about Garden and Gun. About 2 years ago, CBS Morning Show came down to do a big, long feature it turned out to be on Garden and Gun. And it was more or less the story of the little engine that could and how in very tough times we had just kept our eye on the ball and kept this magazine alive. So it was really, really a lovely piece. And then at the end, Gayle King and, what's his name, the Southern, Charlie Rose, thank you, good Southern boy, we're chatting, and Gayle said, you know what, this magazine is doing well by breaking all the rules. And I was flattered that she said that, but I really don't think that we are breaking all the rules. I think at the end of the day, we are doing a pretty old-fashioned traditional magazine that values tradition, values quality, respects its readers, and that we are staying true to what was the original premise for this magazine, which was about the love of the land and that place we call the South. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. We do have time for some questions. If you raise a hand, we'll get a microphone to you. Go right here first.
I was wondering about the hotbeds of Southern interest outside the South. You said 45% of your subscription base is beyond the South. Where are the nodes of interest?
Well, surprisingly, California is a big state for us. I think partly because of its size, the sheer size. But one of the things that we used to do regular city portraits in the magazine. We've kind of moved away from that a little bit. But we would do things like we did an issue on New York City and how, where you can find the South in New York City. We did one on Chicago as well. And so I think that this whole notion of Southern culture, and particularly Southern food, is expanding all across the country, so there are those hotbeds. I mean, the one place, is anybody here from Florida originally? Okay. Where in Florida? Okay. Well, when we launched the magazine, I wasn't sure that Florida was going to be a particularly popular state for us. I thought maybe northern Florida, but that's turned out not to be the case as well. So again, I think it's this fascination with what's going on in the South, and I hope it lasts a long time. Yes.
Thank you for coming.
Oh, thank you.
Don't know a lot about publishing. I'm curious, do you face much competition from the likes of Southern Living?
We do and we don't. Southern Living is certainly a very successful, big machine of a magazine, and I know that they have some good relationships with somebody like P. Allen Smith. In fact, when times were a little bit tough, they actually stole our editor-in-chief, who's now he's the editorial director of what was the old Southern Progress Company. But I'm not worried about it because I think that Southern Living is primarily a female-oriented magazine, for one thing, and it's much, much bigger. And so they found their place. I would say our competition, sometimes it's difficult because we don't really have a competitor. And when in the ad side of the business, when you're trying to get, let's say Ford Trucks to advertise with you, they like to put you in a group. And they want to know, they're going to put you in with the fashion magazines or the culinary magazines or whatever. And so we're in this unique place, which takes some more explanation. But we compete with some of the luxury brands. We compete with the sporting magazines. I do think when you look at Garden and Gun, though, and my father used to say this about the New Yorker. He loved the New Yorker because he liked the big ads and the little ads. And I think the Garden and Gun has a similar mix to that at this point in terms of advertising, that yes, you're going to see some very beautiful ads from luxury brands, but you're also going to find an ad for, a little peanut company out of Virginia, or you're going to find some of these sporting ads that just kind of make the mix more interesting. And I do think I turn down ads if they're going to, I think, mess up the environment of what the magazine is about. We're very particular about that. So the thought of the quality and all of that runs through the whole magazine. But I do think Southern Living, I will say, is doing a nice job, and I think that, he's one of the best in the business, so I wish them all the luck. They're owned by Time Inc., and that's a tough place to be right now.
Right there.
Oh, we had one over here.
Yeah. There's two right there.
Okay.
We just discovered a cookbook that my grandmother had written 80 years ago called Simplified Southern Cooking. She published it here in Little Rock in 1936. She was the wife, or should I say former wife, of a Presbyterian minister. She went on the road afterwards and became a professional home economist and gave lectures all over the country.
Mm-hmm.
My question is, was there any potential for perhaps having this republished it's a marvelous expression not only of her own creativity, but her style of expressing herself and what she felt was very important for other people
Right.
to know.
Well, I would love to see it, and yes, I mean, there's always a possibility. One of the things that we are thinking about, and I don't want to tip my hand too much here, but if you're from Southern Living, close your ears. No. No, we are very interested in the world of books and bookstores ourselves, and are thinking about, we feel like we've shown that if magazines are done well, that people will buy them, and that if I'm intrigued by the world of books and bookstores as well. And so we are definitely exploring the world of cookbooks, and I would love to see it. And those Presbyterian women do know how to do those cookbooks. I mean, probably every church. You all have done those, the women of the church putting their recipes together. I know this is different, but I mean, one of the best sellers in Charleston is a cookbook called Charleston Receipts, and wonderful, done by the Junior League years and years ago. And so I would be very interested in taking a look at that.
We have one in the back.
Thank you. Thank you for an enlightening presentation. I've learned a great deal. But speaking of food in the South and Charleston, where should one take his family for Thanksgiving dinner?
In Charleston?
Yes.
It's tough. My favorite restaurant is Fig. Food is good, Mike Lotta's restaurant. We actually have a new restaurant called Chez Nous, which is very small and only does 2 appetizers and 2 entrees each day, which is just wonderful. This issue of the magazine actually has, I'm very upset to see it in there, kind of the developing Charleston and all of the things that are, because the restaurant scene is just booming there. And so it's given away all of my tips in there. So if you want to take my issue, please, you can have it, and I think that'll give you some good ideas. Okay. But you can't go wrong. It's all good.
Thank you. I probably don't need the microphone very much. But anyway, my question is, first of all, thank you very much for being a new voice of the Old South, the traditional South, and the New South. But the question is, in your geographical diversity that you've had yourself, living in different places and global appeal of the magazine, what would you say would be the biggest misconception of the South, in your opinion? The biggest misconception of the South?
Well, they may not all be misconceptions. But we kind of stay away from some of that in the magazine. But I actually, on that CBS show, I had a night that was even worse than the one I had last night getting here. I had been in Florida and had to end up, my plane was canceled. I ended up having to drive all the way from Miami to Charleston and appear in front of the camera at like 6 o'clock in the morning. And I said something that I said, could we take that off the record? But they didn't. Which I said, I think that we've shown that not all Southerners are stupid. And that wasn't the way I wanted to say that, but I do think that there is still this perception that, we're kind of slow and we don't quite get it. And I think that's one thing. I think people just, who have misperceptions about the South don't really know us. And of course there are people who, in my own particular opinion, think maybe hold on to some ideas too long. But I do like that we've been able to have this respect for tradition and be rooted in that tradition, but put a new face on the magazine. I mean, on the new face on that. So, thank you.
You have one still right there behind you, Kat. Turn around.
They'll get up here sooner or
So
later.
I just want to know a little more about the Jubilee. Did you say the first week in December or November?
First week of December. It's the weekend of the first week of December.
Do you do it outside?
It is outside, but inside too. There are 2 There are two buildings on the property. One is the old plantation house, which is not one of those with big columns and that kind of, and then there's a newer event space. So we do kind of the sporting stuff on the one side and the bazaar and all the wonderful food. I mean, you know, so many food options there. We have restaurants come in and actually serve. We do a Christmas tree farm. Yeah, it's really fabulous. And then some of it is outside. So like last year, we cooked 2 pigs all night long, so you could be there all night if you wanted, with a guy named Rodney Scott, who John T. thinks is the best pitmaster in the country. He was there. We had Junior Brown perform at a dinner that night, which was tons of fun.
What goes on the sporting side of it?
Anything from, there's a little pond there, so you can go out and learn how to cast, fly fishing if you want to. This year we've got Mike Stewart, who is from Mississippi. He's the preeminent dog trainer in the world, and he's going to be bringing some of his dogs, and so you can bring your dog if you want to and have him help train your dog. It's just beautiful. Hopefully the weather is great, and
Have you had a time when the weather was not great?
well, we just did it last year,
Oh.
and yeah, it was not, but it would be fine. It would be fine. So, and we have some packages. If you check it out online, we have some packages with some of the hotels in town, and it's just a really good time. Matthew was there last year. Wasn't Jubilee great? Yeah. Thank you.
I'm one of the early subscribers to your magazine. I was lucky to catch it early. But I've had a lot of problems with my friends and the name. And it takes about a year to get them to start saying garden and guns instead of guns and garden.
Right.
You have that problem?
Oh, yeah, yeah. And then there's the occasional person that calls it Guns and Roses. But I think it captures your attention, and I just have always said, don't just judge a book by its cover, you know, get into it. And we are, you know, you can tell through research, people read this magazine from cover to cover once they get it. And we also have one of the highest renewal rates. It's higher actually than the New Yorker's renewal rate was when I was there. So once people get it, and back to the gift thing, actually 25%